Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Well, all of my students, here is writing guidelines. How to write a scientific article. We will have this discussion into several parts, step-by-step guide from title to references. Okay, let's have a look at the first part. Okay, this is the structure at a glance. What we are going to discuss. At first, we are discussing the title, and then the abstract, and then the introduction, research questions, literature review, method, result and discussion, conclusion, and references. In doing this, look at this, the first and the second. It is blocked in different color, means that it is written in the last step. Although the title is at the beginning of the article, but in the process of writing, you can write it in the last phase or in the last step. Okay, but let's have a look at the next part. The key points of how to construct the title. First, keep it 10 until 15 words. Specific, informative, and focused. Include your topic, context, or maybe period, and analytical approach. So here is the formula. The topic, the context, and the method, or the lens. You have to avoid vague openers like in the title, a study of blah, 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 or an analysis of blah, blah, blah. That's not necessary. So write the title after finishing the whole article for accuracy. So the tip is the best titles are written in the last step, once you truly know what the article argues. For example, Colonial Memory and Identity Construction in Indonesia Post-War Literature, 1945-1965, a post-colonial reading. Okay, in the next part, the abstract is also written in the last. A good abstract should consist of these elements. First, the background. What problem or knowledge gap exists? The purpose. What does this article do or aim to examine? Method. How was the article or the research conducted? Finding and implication. What was found and why does it matter? So write it after all other sections are complete. So never copy-paste sentences from the body. This is a good tip that you have to remember. Paraphrase into compact, fresh language. No citation, no jargon, active voice. A reader must understand your whole work from this alone. So writing the introduction, funnel from broad context to specific gap, and what is your contribution? Things that you have to consider in this introduction. At first, you need to open the introduction with a broader context and significance of the topic, and then identify the specific problem or knowledge gap you can address. Briefly survey what previous research has and has not done. State your article's purpose, scope, and original contribution. Close with a clear sentence. This article argues that blah, 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 blah. The final sentence of the introduction is your academic contract with the reader. So it means that this sentence, this article argues that blah, 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 blah. General phenomenon, specific gap, and your work's entry point. So there's these three aspects should be clearly stated in this introduction. The next is formulating research question. Research question is the engine that drives the entire article. So it should be interpretive, focused, and answerable. So the key points here is that research question in humanities begins with how, why, or what, not does it or is it. Ask about the construction, representation, negotiation, or meaning. Limit yourself into 1 until 3 questions. The research question must be visible throughout the discussion section. Every claim in your analysis should map back to your research question. So the tip is, if your research question can be answered with yes or no, it needs to be reframed. Example, how does the representation of gender in Pramudia Spurukwardit reinforce or resist colonial power structure? Literature review situate your work in ongoing scholarly conversation. So it is not a list of summaries. It is a critical synthesis instead. First, the theoretical framework. Which theory anchor your analysis? Empirical landscape. What has been studied before on this topic? What remains unexplored that your article addresses? Organized by theme or argument, but not chronologically. This is how to write down the literature review. The tip is show how scholars agree, disagree, or build on each other. Then show where you enter. Where is your position? Examples of theoretical lenses: postcolonialism, discourse theory, hermeneutics, feminism, cultural memory studies. For example, the postcolonialism lenses for understanding Pramudia Anantatur's Burukwardit. Okay, the next part is the research method. Research method has the rules to justify how and why you did what you did. So the key points here is name your approach, whether it is textual analysis, discourse analysis, or ethnography. Describe your corpus or data, which primary sources, and why you choose those sources. Explain your analytical procedure step by step, not just the name. Acknowledge what your method can and cannot reveal. Humanities methods are interpretive, mostly. Justify your reading strategy. So the tip is, don't just name your method, how you applied it in your specific material. For example, do not say, I use discourse analysis. Instead, you have to say, I applied Foucauldian discourse analysis to identify power formation in blah, blah, blah. The next is writing the result and discussion. So in result and discussion, you are presenting the findings and interpret them together. So the key points here are, in humanities, result and discussion are typically integrated, not separated. But the main points here is that first, the claim. What does the evidence say? Evidence, quote or reference your primary source. So this is the evidence, the result. And then analysis. What does this mean within your theoretical framework? Connection, how does this relate to your research question and the literature? Organized by thematic argument, not by sources. Each subsection should answer part of your research question. For example, you have 3 research questions, so in this result and discussion, you have 3 subsections. So the structure in the result and discussion is present the claim, give the evidence from primary source and theoretical interpretation, link to the research question. Or the main role of the conclusion is close the loop and open new doors for the others. So you need to do the synthesis. The key points here is restate the purpose. What did the article set out to do? Summarize key findings. Directly answer your research question. Articulate the contribution. What does this add to the field? Suggest future direction. What remains open for future research? Do not introduce new data or arguments in the conclusion. So the tip is, don't start with In conclusion, open instead with your most significant findings. Okay, for example, senior contribution with this study demonstrate that blah blah blah. This analysis extends blah blah blah. This work challenges blah blah. Next part is references. So you have to give credits to your sources, and the references shows or demonstrate your scholarly reading. So the key points here is that match the citation style required by your target journal. Mostly, for example, using APA style. Every in-text citation must have a reference entry and vice versa. So the citation you write down in the text should be prioritize peer-reviewed journals, academic books, and primary sources. Yeah, priority in write down the references. And then aim for recency. It means that do not use the very old reference. Yeah, it is suggested to have last 10 years or maybe last 5 years. It depends on the include foundational and seminal work. Seminal works means that the work, whether it is book or it is a journal article, which is widely referred by the other work or the other journal articles. Yeah. So because it is foundational, because it is important works. So do not miss the seminal works related with your article. The next is use reference manager. You may use Zotero, Mendeley from the very start, so it makes it easier for you. And the tip: check Google footnotes, and notes are common in humanities for extended commentary beyond the main text. Apply this style, Chicago. For example, common styles by discipline, APA, social sciences, linguistics, Chicago style for history, literature, MLA for language and literature. This is just the example you need to. Okay, so this is the recommended writing order. So the order you write is not the same as the order you publish. First, you need to write down the introduction. So here in this introduction, you frame the problem. And then research question means that you define your inquiry or define your question. And then literature review, it means that you map the field or the theoretical and practical landscape. Then the method means that you describe the approach, you describe the data sources, you describe the data collection and how to analyze that data. And then result and discussion, the findings, and you make argument, you build the argument of your findings, your analysis. The conclusion, you synthesize and stating the contribution of your research. Here are the two last part, the abstract, summarize the whole, and the title. So you have to write it precise. Here's the tip. The abstract mirrors the complete article. So you need to write down the abstract after all of this project complete. The title is your final act of naming that you're actually argued. So the title is the very last step you have to think and you consider and to write down. References should be managed continuously throughout the process. So do not only do the references at the last part, but since beginning you have to set which kind of reference style you apply, and then you can, and then keep your research question visible. So when you write down the research question, make it clear. So when you write every section in the chapter 4 or in the findings and discussion, it will be clear as well. Okay, I think that's all for the structure of the article. Every section should respect to your research question. So this is the tips for making your writing smoothly. If a paragraph doesn't answer the research question, cut it or remove it. In humanities, your voice and argument matter. So hedging undermines your contribution. Theory is not decoration. Remember that theory is the lens that makes analysis possible. Primary sources are your data. Treat them as carefully as lab results. Peer review is normal, so revisions are part of the process, not showing your failure. Thank you very much. I hope it's useful. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.